Welcome to World Today, your daily window to the world. I'm Amritpal Singh. On the show tonight, the latest on how the world is fighting the COVID situation, and as European countries lift travel restrictions, how the situation is developing. We'll talk about that and much more over the next 1 hour. And now the headlines. As the world battles COVID-19, face masks to become a matter of personal choice in the United Kingdom, says UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Germany lifts the COVID-related travel ban on people. WHO warns, says countries should be more careful and slow down on easing restriction measures. The United States donates over 1.5 million Moderna vaccines to El Salvador. Afghan security personnel guard the Bagram airbase as U.S. forces leave. Taliban aims to present written peace plan as at talks as soon as next month. Kabul residents express concern over security. Crews in Western Canada battle nearly 200 wildfires amid heat wave. The unprecedented heat wave claims dozens of lives. Heat wave even hits large parts of the U.S. Pacific Northwest. Experts say the heat waves that have descended on parts of the United States this year cannot be linked directly to climate change. The 74th edition of the Cannes Film Festival kicks off. INB Minister Prakash Javadekar virtually inaugurates India Pavilion at Cannes Film Festival 2021, says Cannes Film Market provides opportunity to producers from across the world. And in sports, Italy and Spain to face off in the first semi-final match at Wembley. This is the 7th European Championship meeting, the 4th consecutive tournament. The two nations meet in the knockout stages. And let's begin with the big news. Well, let's talk about the locking and the unlocking and taking COVID precautions in Europe. A quick look at how the COVID-19 numbers stack up across the world. More than 18 crore 49 lakh people have been infected with COVID-19 virus so far. The recoveries have crossed 16 crore 92 lakh. The disease has claimed over 40 lakh lives globally. The US has been the worst affected country with more than 3 crore 45 lakh total infections. The country's fatalities stand at more than 6 lakh 21,000 from the pandemic. And the World Health Organization's head of emergency program warned on Monday that countries should be more careful and slow down on easing restriction measures. While several countries in Europe are easing restrictions, Mike Ryan added that the pandemic is not over and that a possible new wave that could arrive in autumn. Ryan reminded that countries in the Americas are still reporting 1 million cases every week and Europe 500,000. While the new wave is not inevitable, he urged for caution so far as to avoid seeing people running around looking for oxygen or swamped hospitals. He also raised concerns about the lack of funding for WHO, stressing that the organization is unable to use some of its donations freely.
We would like to get back to normal, but the normal we're getting back to, where everyone thinks that we can just go back to just doing everything as we've done before, I think this has been very premature. I think overall we've made a very premature rush back to full normality. And I think we're going to pay a price for that because we're not there at vaccination. The variants are really there, and we haven't protected enough people. And I honestly think that we need to think our way through this, that we're opening up way too quickly for the epidemiologic situation and the risks associated with that.
And even as WHO said this, in Britain, face masks will no longer be legally required and distancing rules will be scrapped at the final stage of England's COVID lockdown roadmap. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has confirmed. The rule of 6 inside private homes will be removed and work from home guidance abolished as 16 months of on-off restrictions on daily life end. Johnson also said that he expects the final step to go ahead as planned on the 19th of July. Further updates on school bubbles, travel and self-isolation will follow in the coming days. Britain now stands 7th in the world COVID tally with over 49 lakh cases of the virus infections and a death toll surging past 1,20,000.
We'll move away from legal restrictions and allow people to make their own informed decisions. We will allow all businesses to reopen, including nightclubs. We will lift the limit on named visitors to care homes and on numbers of people attending concerts, theatre and sports events. We will end the 1 metre plus rule on social distancing and the legal obligation to wear a face covering, although guidance will suggest where you might choose to do so, especially when cases are rising. It will no longer be necessary for government to instruct people to work from home. There will be no COVID certificate required as a condition of entry to any venue or event.
And Germany is lifting the COVID-related travel ban on people from the UK and 4 other countries. The restrictions, which also apply to people from Portugal, Russia, India and Nepal, will also be relaxed. Visitors who are fully vaccinated will also not be required to quarantine. Non-vaccinated people, however, still need to quarantine for up to 10 days with the option to end their quarantine early with a negative test on the 5th day. Although German citizens and residents were exempt from the ban, they were required to quarantine for 14 days when they arrived in the country. Germany's relaxation of restrictions came a few hours after UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson confirmed the country is expecting to lift all COVID-related rules from the 19th of July. And in India, the daily new cases in the country continue to show a decline during the second wave. Less than 50,000 daily new cases have been reported since 9 continuous days. However, the Health Ministry cautioned people against letting the guard down in the fight against COVID-19. The Health Ministry said that the second wave is still existent in a limited way in some areas.
Second wave में एक visible case reduction हम note करते हैं. From a peak of 4,14,000 daily cases, पिछले 9 दिन से कंटिन्यूस बेसिस पर 50,000 से कम केसेस प्रतिदिन के हिसाब से देश में रिपोर्ट हो रहे हैं. विच शोज ए रिडक्शन इन द स्प्रेड ऑफ इन्फेक्शन. वह जिले जहां 100 से अधिक केसेस रिपोर्ट हो रहे थे ऑन ए डेली बेसिस, जो 4 मई के समय पर 531 ऐसे जिले थे, उसको 4 जून के समय पर 262 जिले ऐसे रह गए और अब घटते घटते वह 91 डिस्ट्रिक्ट हो गए हैं.
And the Health Ministry also said that 80% of the new cases in the country are being reported from 90 districts in the country. There are many districts in the country where positivity rate is more than 10%.
देश में 80% नए केसेस अभी 90 जिलों से आ रहे हैं, विच मीन्स कि यह दिखता है कि जो इन्फेक्शन है वो बड़े एक लोकलाइज्ड लिमिटेड ज्योग्राफी में ही अभी स्प्रेड हो रहा है. इसमें मुख्यतः जो स्टेट्स हैं वहां पर, जहां पर उन जिलों में जहां पर की अधिक केसेस रिपोर्ट हो रहे हैं वह भी हमने दर्शाया है, जिसमें मुख्यतः महाराष्ट्र, तमिलनाडु, केरला, उड़ीसा, आंध्र प्रदेश, असम और कर्नाटक और उसी तरह से नॉर्थ ईस्ट के हमारे वह स्टेट्स है जहां कुछ जिलों में अधिक केसेस रिपोर्ट हो रहे हैं.
So that's what the situation is in India and worldwide, even as Europe is slowly lifting restrictions. To talk more about that, I'm joined by Ambassador Vishnu Prakash. He's a former diplomat. Thank you, sir, for joining us on the show today. My opening question to you: as the United Kingdom, Germany, countries of Europe lift restrictions, Boris Johnson today said that wearing face masks wouldn't be legally binding. They are looking at abolishing abolishing the 1 meter distance rule there of physical distancing. He said nightclubs, etc., will be opened, but the WHO warns that they're doing it too early. In fact, the head of emergency services goes on to say that we might have to pay the price for that.
Well, good evening and pleasure to be on the program with you. WHO's track record is not the very best. When India, if we all remember, in January last year, had issued a travel advisory, they had opposed it. So they oppose it at times when it is required, they oppose it when it is not required. I find that there is lack of clarity. The challenge also is that it's a pandemic of unknown proportions, and the world has hardly witnessed anything like this. So everybody is taking a position, trying to make a judgment. It's a judgment call all along, and see how best to balance it. There's a question of life, there's a question of livelihood, there's a question of normalcy, there's a question of protecting the citizens. But every country is taking decisions. Mostly they are right, somewhere the call can go wrong. The challenge today is that the pandemic is evolving, it is mutating in ways that people cannot understand, even the virologists cannot understand. So that is the challenge. But so far the world has done a good job of trying to adjust positions accordingly, and care is being taken. Now, in Europe, they have managed to, in some countries they managed to overcome. US has done a good job. India has already administered something like 36 crore or 360 million jabs.
Vaccine doses, yes.
Vaccine doses. Now 360 million jabs is something quite sizable. Granted that the percentage of the population covered which has received 2 jabs is not very high, but India is a very large country and the pace of vaccine is stepped up. So there is efforts are being made, and we'll have to wait and watch. I hope that WHO can do a more professional job, but that's my personal opinion.
No, Ambassador, let's keep the politics of WHO aside.
Yeah.
Is it time for the world to open up? As Boris Johnson goes on to say, masks not required, social distancing rules will not apply, nightclubs will open, bubbles, travel bubbles, especially when it comes to school children, etc., removed. Now, is it time to open up? Even as you say, India's administered 36 crore vaccine doses, but the Health Ministry's press conference still says that in 90 districts of the country, the positivity rate is above 10%. So, as the virus is mutating not just in India but around the world, is it time for the world to open up? Is it too soon?
Well, the answer is yes, no, maybe, perhaps, and it's for the simple reason that one yardstick cannot apply to every country and every situation. It's a very dynamic situation. The situation varies from region to region, country to country. So people, the leaders who take the decision, the virologists are already on the top of it, calibrating their decisions very carefully because, as I said, it's a balance. Now, in the US, in the East Coast, they have virtually done away with the masks. But in some countries, it is required. I mean, in India, it has been time and again mentioned that, well, it is on the decline. And you also just mentioned in your report that the number of daily incidents have fallen below 50,000 daily. But even 50,000 is 50,000 too many. So therefore, Government of India has been pressing and encouraging everybody to wear masks. So it will vary from country to country, I'm afraid. And the vigil will have to be constant because experts say that this pandemic is not going to go away in a hurry, and we may see it mutating in different forms, coming back, second, third wave, eventually will prevail. But in the interim, I think nations will have to feel their way around.
Okay. Also, Ambassador, let's talk about, lifting of travel restrictions. Germany has lifted travel restrictions over Indians. They can travel to Germany. India had been, the EAM made a strong pitch to the European Union saying, please accept the AstraZeneca vaccine, which we call Covishield here, and reciprocally. And but the EU has not really done that. Some individual countries are allowing that. So is it time for the EU to say that yes, there is a vaccination going on, and that vaccine, say Covishield, is approved internationally? So to give a green pass on that?
Absolutely, totally, and not today, but yesterday or day before yesterday it would have been done. It is, to me, quite disappointing that the European Union, which is a strategic partner, should have one standard for UK and another for India. Now let us look at it absolutely clinically. As you very rightly said, Covishield is nothing but Oxford AstraZeneca. Now Oxford AstraZeneca being manufactured under license by SII, which is one of the biggest vaccine producers in the world, has a tremendous track record, and has been supplying this vaccine along with other vaccine producers in India to practically every second country or even more in the world. Now that is the track record. What is EU saying? Saying, gentlemen, Oxford AstraZeneca is good for us, but India produced AstraZeneca or Covishield is not good for us. Now, what would you call it? I would call it double standards. And that has not been the first time, that's not the last time. What are they trying to say? They are trying to say that SII is perhaps not up to the mark, that what is produced in India now may not be up to the mark. I mean, is this tenable? Indian vaccine has gone to 60 countries. More countries are wanting it. We have, as we just discussed, that 360 million doses have been administered. So I'm afraid EU has to get their act right, and they are doing so, in my view, under pressure from Big Pharma, because Big Pharma is very uncomfortable to see the rise of India as the pharmacy of the world. But that is something that European Union has to take a view on, whether they want to have equity or nationalism. And the world is watching. Ndia will march on, but what they are doing is something that cannot be accepted. Yes, 9 European countries, including 8 EU countries, have already approved it. But I would have expected European Union to do that yesterday.
Ambassador, you say equity versus nationalism. Even if, let's argue from the nationalism point of view, as Europe opens up, their tourism industry is hit, their universities are hit, so the Indian students study there, they are facing travel restrictions, the tourists are facing travel restrictions. Today, as the Cannes opens, India is virtually participating in the pavilion. It's a big market for films. So even from a pure economic point of view, just the pharma sector, but what about the other parts of the economy? India is a huge trading bloc with them.
India is a huge trading bloc with the EU, no doubt, but there are politics does come in. At a pinch, a Covaxin not being approved at a pinch is still understandable because WHO has not approved it. Now WHO has approved Covishield.
Yes.
And as we discussed, it is in demand. It's a product which every country wants very quickly. Now, what about tens of crores of Indians who have gotten it and they're fine? So basically, big pharma means very big money. And even for the hospitality industry, yes, there's going to be a setback in terms of the regular visitors, but if those people who are forced to go to these European countries where they have to be quarantined, again hotels are going to be used, again it is going to generate revenue. How much I do not know. But the optics of that is something which is quite not only worrisome but unhealthy. And you know, if you look at the behavior of the European Union, last year when they were reeling under the pandemic and a certain big country had supplied material to them which was substandard, had aggravated conditions. The moment they came out of it, they wanted to have an investment treaty with that country. So they have different standards for different countries. And this is something that we take note of. But as I said, this is not equity, this is nationalism, this is politics. And the idea was when G7 countries and all got together to say, we will fight it together. But this is the example of togetherness that we see.
Okay. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, we'll have to leave it there. Many thanks for joining us on the show and lending us your insights. Thank you. And moving on to our next segment, Asia Today. Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam said on Tuesday that the proposed changes to the city's privacy law will only target illegal doxing behavior, referring to the practice of sharing of people's personal data without their consent. She also urged parents, teachers and religious leaders to observe the behavior of teenagers and report those who break the law to the authorities. Lam was speaking at a weekly news briefing after an Asian industry group that includes Google, Facebook and Twitter warned that tech companies could stop offering their services in Hong Kong if it proceeds with the plans to change privacy laws. The financial hub has taken a swift authoritarian turn since China's imposition of a sweeping national security law last year, which introduced changes to its political system to reduce democratic participation and oust people deemed disloyal to Beijing. Since the security law was introduced, the most prominent government opponents have been jailed or fled abroad. Critics say the legislation has crushed the city's wide-ranging rights and freedoms, while supporters say it has restored stability. Rescuers in Japan are searching for 80 people missing 2 days after landslides tore through the seaside city of Atami, destroying houses and burying roads under mud and rock. The official death toll from the landslides that hit early on Saturday is 4, according to the Atami city spokesperson Hiroki Onuma. The number of those missing had come down from 113 earlier. A 75-year-old man had a lucky escape when the house across his was swept away. 2 persons were found alive and unharmed on Monday. Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga said that police, firefighters and members of the military were doing all they could to help with the search. The landslides were triggered by torrential downpour, with some areas receiving more rain in 24 hours than they would usually get for the whole of July. Let's talk about Afghanistan, the situation there. Bagram Air Base. It was the backbone of US military operations in Afghanistan for 20 long years, but that mandate has ended. A discreet withdrawal of the very symbolic base of Bagram took place on the 2nd of this month. It was the most strategic and the largest American base in Afghanistan. Now it has been handed over to the Afghan army, which has been weakened by in the recent weeks by unprecedented military breakthrough by the Taliban.
They are the Afghan security personnel guarding Bagram Air Base after American troops left their main military base in Afghanistan, marking a symbolic end to the longest war in US history. The quiet departure from Bagram Air Base on July 2nd came as the Taliban insurgency ramped up its offensive throughout the country after peace talks sputtered. The Taliban plan to present a written peace proposal to the Afghan government side as soon as next month. A spokesman for the Islamist insurgents said even as they make major territorial gains in the breach left by departing foreign forces. Hundreds of Afghan security force members have fled into neighboring Tajikistan in the face of Taliban advances since the United States vacated its main Afghan base as part of a plan to withdraw all foreign troops. The crossings underscore a rapidly deteriorating situation of escalating violence days after the official withdrawal of foreign troops. American troops pulled out of their main military base in Afghanistan on July 2nd, leaving behind a piece of the World Trade Center they buried 20 years ago in a country that could descend into civil war without them. Though a few more troops have yet to withdraw from another base in capital Kabul in the coming days, the Bagram pullout brings an effective end to the longest war in American history. US effectively acknowledges that the coming days will be a litmus test for the Ghani regime. Peace talks between the two sides remain inconclusive. Kabul residents have expressed concern after US forces handed over the main Bagram sit base and pulled troops, saying they feared the security situation in the country could worsen. The handover of the base to the Afghan government was part of an agreement with the Taliban, allowing for the withdrawal of all US forces from the country after a 2-decade war. US President Joe Biden announced that he will be withdrawing all remaining combat troops from Afghanistan by September 11th. The removal of around 3,000 American troops coincides with the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 terror attacks, which sparked the initial US invasion of Afghanistan. According to reports, in the last 2 decades, the US military has lost more than 2,300 soldiers, tens of thousands have been wounded, countless Afghan lives have been lost, and an estimated $2 trillion in taxpayer money has been spent. With Bureau Inputs, DD India.
And let's talk about the heat wave in Canada and Northern America. Hundreds of deaths in Canada and America may have been caused by the historic heat wave that packed Canada's western territories and US Northwest and shattered all-time temperature records in usually temperate cities. Here's a detailed report.
Unprecedented heat wave has claimed dozens of lives in Canada and still no respite. Firefighters are busy extinguishing nearly 200 wildfires raging in Western Canada. Dozens of personnel arrived from across the country, including from Ontario and New Brunswick. There were 199 active fires raging across the Pacific province of British Columbia as of Monday afternoon, with 46 sparked in the last 2 days reportedly. 2/3 of them are considered out of control. Several of the wildfires have prompted evacuations, including in Lytton, where a fire that started on June 30th razed the town to the ground and caused 2 deaths. Over 710,000 lightning strikes were recorded in British Columbia and Western Alberta between 3 p.m. on June 30th and on July 1st, a 10-fold increase from an average 8,300 from the same period over the past 5 years, according to Chris Vagaskay, a meteorologist with Vaisala. Over 1,300 homes were ordered evacuated, and it was not known how many people were missing as of Friday, and so the Red Cross is running a phone line for family reunification. The Pacific province of British Columbia has been recovering from the grip of an unprecedented heat wave, which has so far caused 719 confirmed deaths, triple what would normally occur in the same time period. During the heat wave, the town of Lytton broke Canada's 80-plus-year-old heat record with a 49.6 degrees Celsius temperature. A forest fire that started on June 30th razed Lytton to the ground and caused 2 deaths. The cause of the fire was under investigation. A heat wave has even hit large parts of the US Pacific Northwest. The soaring temperatures are due to a dome of high pressure hovering over northwestern United States and Canada. This summer, the jet stream, a strong high-altitude wind, moved northwards and allowed the hot air coming from the south to accumulate under a kind of dome which remains blocked on the ground by the high pressures. Record temperatures have exceeded 49.5 degrees Celsius in Canada. Several hundred deaths and fires are to be deplored.
The heat is being caused by an atmospheric blocking pattern, so it means that these very high temperatures are concentrated over one particular area. And normally you have the jet stream, which is this fast, high-moving belt of wind, which moves these weather systems on, and it's not happening this time. So we've got it's almost like a pressure cooker effect. You know, you've got very, very, very high heat.
Experts say the heat waves that have descended on parts of the United States this year cannot be linked directly to climate change, but unusual weather patterns could become more common amid rising global temperatures. World Today Desk, DD India.
And let's now talk about the Cannes Film Festival. Members of the 2021 jury, led by Malcolm X, director Spike Lee, and comprising mostly women, arrived ahead of the opening festivities for the 74th edition of the film festival. Making history as the first African-American jury president, Spike Lee will head the judging panel with help from 8 jurors of 7 different nationalities. 5 women make up this year's jury, including French singer Marlene Farmer and actress Maggie Gyllenhaal and Melanie Lawrence. The 2021 jury also includes French Senegalese director Mati Diop, whose debut feature Atlantics won a top award at the 2019 Cannes Festival. French actor Tahar Rahim, known for his role in Jacques Audiard's The Prophet, and Brazilian director Kleber Mendonça Filho, Australian film director Jessica Hosner, and South Korean actor Song Kang-ho. One of the stars of The Parasite, which won the coveted Palme d'Or in 2019, are also on the jury. The festival runs from Tuesday, that's today, until Saturday, July 17th. The jury will assess each of the 24 films in competition and unveil its list of winners during the closing ceremony. And Union Minister for Information and Broadcasting Prakash Javadekar inaugurated Virtual India Pavilion at the 74th Cannes Film Festival, which began at the French Riviera. The festival is taking place from the 6th to the 17th of this month. This year, a total of 24 films are vying for the prestigious Palme d'Or award. The festival was originally scheduled from 11th to 22nd of May this year. Javadekar said that this is the second year when the pavilions are virtually organized, but the business is real.
It gives me immense pleasure to inaugurate India Pavilion of 74 Cannes Film Festival. This is second year when all have virtual pavilions. But the business is real. It's creativity, it's talent, it's technology, and it's business. And India offers the best.
Javadekar also said that India's contribution to world cinema is increasing. He added that a lot of Hollywood movies have got their VFX animation done in India.
Lots of popular Hollywood movies have got their VFX animation work done in India. Just to name few: Lion King, Jungle Book, Life of Pi, X-Men, Avatar. So all popular films, practically. Now India's contribution to these world films is also increasing. This is why Cannes Film Festival is a festival of creativity, festival of talent, but simultaneously a place of business. Films, after the pandemic, will again resume doing huge business.
And the Secretary of the Ministry of R&D, Amit Khare, unveiled the regulations booklet and the poster of the 52nd edition of the International Film Festival of India at the virtual Indian Pavilion held in the Cannes Film Market. Khare said that India is one of the largest producers of cinema. He added that this year also marks the beginning of the 75th year of celebration of India's independence, along with the centenary year celebrations of Satyajit Ray.
In spite of the challenges being faced all over the world because of the ongoing pandemic, We are here to showcase to the world our cultural and cinematic heritage, as also the advancements that we have made in the sphere of filmmaking. Our delegation and all our well-wishers will be showcasing India at 75 and also the rich heritage and cinematic skills as also literary skills exhibited in various works of late Satyajit Ray.
And for more on that, I'm joined by Dilip Chenoy, the Secretary General of FICCI, who now joins us. Dilip Chenoy, many thanks for joining us. As we saw the inauguration of the Virtual India Pavilion by the INB Minister, FICCI is also co-host in that. What could we expect at the India Pavilion?
So thank you for that. And as the Minister and the Secretary mentioned, there are four objectives of really the virtual participation in the Cannes Festival market, as we call it, because this is the second year that we're doing it. The first is actually, encouraging different countries. The Minister mentioned the animation that we have done for various films. So the animation and gaming sector, there's going to be roundtables with different countries showing what India could do. There is also roundtables on, on the potential for people to participate in IFFI. You mentioned that Secretary Mr. Amit Khare had released the two booklets there. And the third thing is that there are many areas of collaboration and states would like people to come and shoot in India. So the Film Facilitation Office is also looking at attracting people to look at shooting in India. The fourth is it's also a marketplace for films. Films traditionally, what we see, we tend to relate to the screen, but now the OTT, those OTT film makers also are looking for talent and looking for other aspects there. Interesting dimension was brought in this morning in the discussion by Mr. Subhash Ghai, when he said that, okay, India is also looking at becoming a center for training and skilling, young people in the art of filmmaking, acting, and all that. So those are really the, 5 different elements that we are portraying in the India Pavilion. It is really to connect virtually with a lot of filmmakers and, other people who normally visit Cannes physically, but this time, as the Minister said, second year succession, it is virtual. Although the embassy from France, Mr. Javed Ashraf, the ambassador to France, was there, he said the embassy would have a physical presence there because internally they can really look at the whole effect and the whole matchmaking exercise there.
Mr. Chenoy, as you said, and the Minister said, this is the second year that India is virtually participating in this India Pavilion at the Cannes market. But if you have a physical presence, the kind of business generated there is very, very different from what was the past experience that we saw. Also, because at that time the pandemic was at its, was on an uptake. How does it really affect the business part of it?
So last year also, we were there virtually, right? And the challenge is that film business in India and in some countries overseas is being impacted because theaters are not functioning to full efficiency. In fact, in many states, theaters have just been allowed to open, and that too with 50% capacity. So you actually heard the Minister talk about, what we could, that the theaters will come back. So if you look at the volume of business transacted on films, last year and this year worldwide, was a little restricted because there were no major releases, etc. in theaters. But on the OTT platforms, a lot of business actually shifted into the different OTT platforms, and it also gave a new format for films. So not only did you have a film, but you had short series, you had longer series, and a lot of Indian content is actually showing up in a lot of international OTT players and in multiple languages. So this is also being enabled by, festivals like Cannes and other areas, including IFFI, which we did, a part physical, part virtual last year.
Okay, and because of the restrictions that are still in place, it's one thing to talk about coming, co-producing in India or shooting in India. How is the world taking that, the whole travel to India and the shooting, given the restrictions that prevail here, or given the COVID situation here?
Yeah, actually, that's a bit of a challenge there, and even in this time also shooting was restarted sometime earlier this year, but in the second wave, shooting was again suspended. But that's a case in many parts of the world, and people are actually innovating. It's like even this studio, even television studio. Earlier I would be physically there in the studio. Today I'm virtually present.
Right.
So a lot of innovative ways of filming and shooting and making films without actually being there are being done. And, entertainment is coming up. Yes, not the 2,000 films that we expected every year, but I think the numbers are growing, and we will see some upward movement if there's no other, as the pandemic eases and there's no other wave going forward. And it's the same thing all around the world.
That's very true. Also, you spoke about, the minister said that, the pavilion might be virtual, but the business is real. Given last year's experience, do you expect interest in the India Pavilion from a global, the global filmmakers?
Yeah, I think I think everybody has adapted to the virtual world. And people are finding, in a virtual discussion, or if you're in a meeting, you can actually also pull aside in a separate room, and those facilities are available. Those that are really, it's a very important festival. And as you mentioned when you started this program, that itself it has been deferred from May, and it's being actually held in July, also in a virtual mode. So I think a lot of filmmakers, studios are still looking at fresh talent, fresh content, fresh writers, fresh stories. So this all is also possible virtually, and you'll actually see that happen. And since this is the second year in turn, it will be significantly larger than last year. Because last year was a very novel experience, but this year we've actually got used to it, and there's much more interaction going on.
True. Also, Mr. Chinoy, let's talk about the Indian filmmaking industry. In a new situation where a lot of things are happening virtually, the whole way we work. For example, you said that earlier, if I were to have this interaction with you, I would be inviting you to the studio. Now I don't even think about it, and you connect from your office or even from your home or even while on the go. Things have changed the way the world now operates, the way the world works. How has the Indian film industry adapted to that, and has it well adapted that the global film industry can look at collaborating? Do we have that sort of technology here? Are our technicians, etc., that technology savvy? Have they adapted? Can collaborations take place? How practically possible is the new business model?
Actually, it's very interesting because India was ahead of the curve if you looked at animation and gaming and, all those sorts of technologies which are being used currently. So if you're looking at the content that is coming out, if you see a lot of the OTT platforms, whether it is Netflix, Amazon, or, the other ones, including the Indian platforms like Z or Alt or whatever it is, they're having a lot of good content coming up, and which has actually been created during the time of the COVID. Some of it is done pre-COVID, but a lot of it was done during COVID, and they found new ways to adapt and new ways to shoot and new ways to actually produce this. But yeah, if shooting is completely banned, then that's a different issue. But with whatever restrictions and whatever way shooting is allowed, it is happening. In fact, for the ministry, FICCI also actually did some messages on, appropriate COVID behavior. There's wearing your mask, sanitizing, and keeping, social distancing with film actors. And we got permission to shoot, right? And, so it is possible to actually do that. and use technology. And I don't think the Indian film industry, the Indian creative industry is lagging behind in this area. And it's a great opportunity to collaborate with our partners overseas.
All right, we'll see how much business is generated at the India Pavilion. Dilip Choi, many thanks for joining us and sharing your insights with us. Thank you. And let's now take a look at what else made news in our next segment, which we call News at Glance.
Ukrainian and US naval forces finished the stage of joint combat training and moved on to stage of sea drills as part of exercise Sea Breeze 2021. Guided missile destroyer USS Ross and HMS Trent patrol vessel from Royal Navy will be involved in the sea exercises.
We're stopping that and let's go over live to where External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar is addressing the Indo-Pacific
Business Summit. I commend the CII that in partnership with the Ministry of External Affairs, they have laid the foundation of a very promising platform. As many of you are aware, the Indo-Pacific represents a return of history. A seamless and integrated space was disconnected decades ago by the strategy of the day. Today, as many Indian Ocean economies trade further east, and as Pacific ones too have displayed a presence south and westwards, we are quite sensibly seeing the landscape for what it really is. Indo-Pacific reflects the reality of globalization, the emergence of multipolarity, and the benefits of rebalancing. It means the overcoming of the Cold War and a rejection of bipolarity and dominance. Most of all, it is an expression of our collective interest in promoting global prosperity and securing the global commons. The Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, advanced by India, clearly validates this assertion. As we speak of common good and common efforts, it is natural that this is addressed, amongst other means, through a business summit. So once again, I'm so glad to welcome you all to it. The transformation of the last decade is today overshadowed, unfortunately, by the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. It has disrupted our supply chains, negatively impacted manufacturing, made international trade unpredictable, and ruined many services sectors. Globalized production networks remain vulnerable and fragile, with global merchandise trade falling by 5.6% in 2020 compared to 2019, and the predicted trade in services declining by as much as 15.4% in the same duration. This decline in merchandise trade is the sharpest since 2009, whereas the decline in services trade is the biggest since 1990. The hit taken by travel, transport, and tourism activities is alarming and really moves us into uncharted territory. Even as we each plan our national and collective recovery in these difficult circumstances, there are three issues that the pandemic has brought to the fore. One, the salience of health. Two, the power of the digital. And three, the importance of building or rebuilding greener. COVID-19 had brought out many inadequacies in the global health system, and the resulting debates are taking place elsewhere. What is relevant for us here is to recognize that in every society, the expectation of our public health with regard to health has gone up. This is particularly so in developing countries, including India. Whether it is the next wave, the next pandemic, or indeed something quite different, part of the answer lies in greater international collaboration. By that I mean the working together not just of governments, but of businesses and the medical and scientific professions. Prime Minister Modi has called for adopting a One Earth, One Health approach at the recent G7 summit, where India was a guest. We need meaningful partnerships, sharing of advanced technologies, collaboration in vaccine and pharmaceutical production, capacity building and transparency in health information. And in all of this, the role of our private sectors is critical. The compulsions of the COVID era have all made us much more digital. This may be literal in terms of contact tracing and vaccination registration, facilitative in terms of home delivery and virtual calls, or just a lifestyle in case of work from home. New opportunities and efficiencies have been discovered in the process. And accordingly, the risks too have magnified. High-speed internet, cyber security, enhanced digital literacy, deeper technical cooperation, regional e-commerce, and efficient e-governance will have a more salient place in the conversations of the coming days. The strengthening of digital connectivity, both within and between the countries of the Indo-Pacific, is an essential condition for our economic prosperity and development. Like-minded countries must work together for data-driven digital development partnerships. The templates of that could draw on the framework that govern existing development partnerships. The COVID may have slowed the building of the global economy and the promotion of economic recovery. It has obviously not stopped it. This is therefore an occasion to reflect, perhaps introspect, on how to build greener. Many of us have national programs to that end, and collaborating more closely is obviously to our mutual benefit. Our collective efforts can certainly redefine the quality of infrastructure and indeed the nature of urbanization. They can make agriculture more sustainable and harness the blue economy more seriously. Physical and digital connectivity remain important for supporting shorter, efficient, and diversified supply chains, risk mitigation, enhanced trade facilitation, and reduction in the cost of intra-regional trade. So, in this context, let me share with all of you briefly how we in India are responding to the challenges of recovery and rebuilding. We have reformed even as we have rebuilt. On health, our program of wider health coverage has been accelerated by the rapid expansion last year of the health infrastructure. Currently, mass vaccination and addressing the ongoing wave are the focus, but the goal is to transform the sector entirely by augmenting human resources, equipment, and capacities. On the digital side, the expansion of connectivity, a skills initiative, and a startup culture are helping to change the game. On infrastructure, a range of initiatives and reforms that are unfolding even as we speak will surely spur greater investment. On agriculture, empowering farmers and enabling freer trade has been matched by a stronger commitment to post-harvest infrastructure. And across 13 key sectors, performance-linked initiatives promise to upscale manufacturing. Bold measures have just recently been taken to promote tourism, and all of this is encapsulated by a framework that envisages an India of deeper strengths, greater capacities, and more responsibility. And not least, in making it much easier to do business. So in conclusion, my message is this: India is coming out of the second wave and will witness a strong economic recovery. It will be a more dynamic and friendlier business destination. We will contribute to being an engine of growth for the global economy. we will be very much a part of more reliable and resilient supply chains that the post-COVID world requires. International cooperation, especially among businesses, will be very much a key to the better world that we all seek. The Indo-Pacific, a region in which we are so deeply invested historically, will be an arena of particular activity and energy. I look forward to working with all of you in the coming days. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Jaishankar. We are indeed grateful to you.
So that was External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar addressing the Indo-Pacific Business Summit, making a pitch for as the economy opens up, as the COVID situation restrictions recede, saying that together we'll have to build a new economy, and he invited businesses from the region to come invest, work with India, and again rebuild the economy, saying our supply chains will be more resilient and we are prepared for a post-COVID building up of the economy. Moving on, Italy and Spain go ahead to head the European Championship knockout game for the 4th tournament in a row, with a place in the Euro 2020 final against England or Denmark up for grabs. Here's a report.
In Euro, Italy will clash with Spain in the first semi-final at Wembley late tonight. This is the country's 7th meeting in the European Championship, with Spain's only win in the 90 minutes coming in the 2012 final, which they won 4-0. Italy has beaten Spain in the last 16 at the Euro 2016. Italy, who are unbeaten in almost 3 years, have been arguably the most impressive team in Euro 2020 so far. They have won all 3 group games before beating Austria in extra time, and then Belgium, the #1 ranked team in the world, 2-1 in the quarterfinals. There are unlikely to be too many fans of either side at the game. Anybody flying from Spain or Italy into England would have to be quarantined, and therefore they will not be able to attend the tournament. Italy defeated Belgium 2-1 in the first quarter-final to extend their unbeaten run to 32 matches. Spain advanced by beating Switzerland 3-1 on penalties after a 1-all draw. Italy, Spain, Denmark and England have qualified for the semi-finals, which will be held at the Wembley Stadium in London. Sports Desk, Did India.
And that's it then in World Today. Thanks for watching, but remember, even as things are improving, as numbers are coming down, COVID hasn't gone anywhere, and our only way to defeat is by wearing the mask when you step out. I'm alone in the studio right now, so I took off the mask, but as I step out of the studio, I'm going to wear one. And secondly, get yourself vaccinated. That's very important. That's our biggest weapon to fight COVID. So if you're eligible, if you're above 18 years of age, go out and get yourself vaccinated. Till we meet again, stay safe, take care of yourself. Namaskar.